What a segue. What do you remember about Candyman?
Oh, I just remember that it was quite an adventure to shoot it. I wasn't originally supposed to play Helen. The director was married to an actress named Alexander Pig, and she was like one of my best friends. I mean, the director was friends with my husband. We were like, you know, the married foursome. And Alexandra got pregnant and had been trying to get pregnant for a long time, and it seemed like the movie was very arduous and there was going to be a lot of physical things for her to do and it wouldn't be safe. And I was playing the role that Casey Lemons played. And so it was very awkward, and I was really, because Alexandra was the one who found the short story and brought it to Bernard, and he wrote the screenplay. So it was a, you know, it was a mixed blessing, and I said, no, I can't take your role. And she came over to my house and said, you know, this is really hard for me, but there just can't be anyone else but you to play this part or I'll feel really bad. And so it was kind of an offer I couldn't refuse, and she said, please, you know, love it the way that I would have loved it and do it, you know, do it as best you can. It was, I don't know, it's still kind of moving to this day, but that's how I stepped into it, and we had a good time with a lot of blood.
It's a very unusual movie. Okay, it's a horror movie, but the thing about Candyman is it's a very literate script, really careful direction. All the performances are good, and it's almost like a novella. It just crawls along at a pace. It's very urban too. It takes place in the city, you know, very urban, run-down kind of area. Everybody's really serious, because it's always, with horror movies sometimes, it's always a lot of wink-wink. Like, we know what we're doing, it's a joke, it's a horror movie. But Candyman, I think, maybe has staying power. Because everybody believed in what they were doing, and it was good.
I think there's always room for a bit of sarcasm and humor and maybe some, there's sort of a black comedy aspect to many horror films today. But I'm a huge fan of the horror, sci-fi, fantasy genre, and I'd never done one before because I couldn't find one that had a really good story. And this did. This had all the elements of a classic horror film, and it's kind of wonderful that it's now comes on like every Halloween, and so that means a lot to me. But it is very poetic, very well written.
Well, you must be really good at choosing interesting roles, because before that, a couple of years before that, Dune, you were in David Lynch's Dune, which is a huge cult following again.
Yeah, that was my first job that I got in Hollywood, and the role was originally, this happens, I don't know why, in my career, in, I don't know, maybe at least 10 movies that I was not the one first cast, that I replaced someone. And in this one, it was Helena Bonham Carter, who was playing Princess Irulan, and she was doing A Room with a View, and it just ran over by a week or something, and the production wasn't going to let her out in time to begin. And so I had already auditioned for the part, and David Lynch gave the part then to me, which I was very grateful. I stepped in, and it was a hell of a way to start.
Do you have any quick remembrances of working on Dune in Mexico?
Well, I remember having terrible Montezuma's revenge. So you imagine in that kind of wardrobe. I had the scene where, I mean, once I did the monologue, which was the thing I did the day I arrived, and I was immediately thrown into makeup and hair, and in the makeup room, I was sitting next to Conan the Barbarian, who was played by Alan Schwarzenegger back then, and I was just like, and he walked in and he pulled off, and he knew, he pulled off his robe, and it was so extraordinary, the physical specimen that he was, that I turned completely, I was 19, and I was kind of, and I said something stupid like, I've just never seen a man that big. I was so embarrassed, and I just was bright red. And he began to, as they were putting this big gash on his massive pec, he began to give me all kinds of advice on how to do my taxes. He goes, now you're going to be a big star. And I'm going to tell you now the most important thing you have to do. If I had listened to his advice, I probably should have, because I spent every dime that I got from then on. But he was very nice to me. And then once I got on the set, in the scene where there's a big battle going on between Sting and the loincloth. And Kyle and all these actors and Patrick Stewart that I had a huge crush on. But this particular day where all I had to do was just stand there all day, I had become violently ill the night before, violently ill. So once they injected me with a bunch of, I don't even know, I just know these Mexican doctors came in with 3 giant hypodermic needles and injected me. And then I was basically okay to stand on a set for a while. So they put a stool, a bar stool underneath the costume because I was like this. I mean, I was like really, really delirious. And you can kind of see it in the movie, I'm a little bit sweaty. And I just sat on that stool all day long. And I don't remember much else about that day. So those are my stories.
Wow. A movie I wanted to ask you about was something that used to play a lot in the early days of cable, a movie called Gotham, with Tommy Lee Jones. It's a really, really good ghost story, love romance thing. What do you remember about that? Do you?
I remember being in this big vat of dirty black water that was supposed to be the East River, and that was very unpleasant. They kept adding more dirt to it, and I don't think it was Fuller's Earth, which they use, that's supposed to be non-toxic. I think it was really just dirt they kept throwing in. But I do remember what a good time I had with Tommy Lee Jones, and Michael Chapman was the DP who shot Raging Bull. So he was, you know, fresh from the Academy Awards, and it was really an honor being lit by him. And then years later, I did this movie for Robert Altman called The Prairie Home Companion, where I was the angel of death, and Tommy Lee Jones showed up to also, he was kind of in, you know, sort of a spirit like that too. And so when I hadn't seen him, I saw him like at the Men in Black premiere or something like that, but I hadn't seen him in a long time. And so he came up and he sort of looked me up and down, and he goes, "Why is it that every time I see you, you're dead?" A ghost in this movie Gotham, so it was really great, and he's a wonderful man and still is.
Because Gotham is one of the movies that's not talked about that much.
Well, it's pretty good.
Well, it's a cult film.
It looks really cool.
It looks cool, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of for what it is for like film noir. It's very consistently, you know, they stuck to all the rules, and it's just a weird movie. And they were doing a lot of that then for made for cable movies.
Yeah, well, maybe that's why it stayed a made for cable movie though.
Well, I mean, it's funny, I made HBO's first movie ever, and a baseball movie called Long Gone, and it was considered a real step down. Like, if you went from features to television, that was like considered not a good thing to do. And then if you went down lower, you did a made-for-cable movie. And I made a lot of stinkers there, I certainly did, but that was a good one. And of course now, you know, TV is where the power and money is, and you know, everyone would work for free to do a feature for HBO. So I think I had the right idea.
No, that sounds good. Highlander 2.
Highlander 2, yes.
The much troubled
production. It was really bad.
With Sean Connery and the other guy. I forgot his name. Help me out. Christopher Lambert.
Yes, Christopher Lambert.
What do you remember about that one?
Well, I remember that was a really incredible kiss. I had the most ridiculous makeout scene where, and I was friends with Chris, and he was married to Diane Lane, and she was there at the time, and you know, I didn't really see him as attractive because he was married, and I liked her an awful lot, and so it comes to the scene where, if you haven't seen the movie, he's an old man, and then he gets, you know, he becomes the Highlander, and all of this energy comes into him, and big explosions happen, and he becomes very young and very handsome, and I'm there going, oh, and he turns and must have me. And so now he turns and must have me. And he comes, you know, walking towards me and throws me up against the wall and kisses me, which is one of my favorite things to do in life. And he quite literally took my breath away. I'd never had a kiss like that on screen, and made my, and I almost fell down. He had to hold me up. He was so good. And I changed my opinion after that. It's like, Diane, I really didn't realize he was that attractive before. Please forgive me.
Well, if you got to take away a memory.
Sean Connery was the reason I was there, in fact. And I spent a lot of time with him, and a lot of late night dinners, and he was just, you know, and I was told, we were all told not to mention the B word when Mr. Connery arrived, that he would not talk about James Bond, and he didn't want, everyone was instructed not to mention it, and we weren't supposed to talk about Tarzan either, because Christopher was Tarzan. So I had a t-shirt made that said Jane Moneypenny, and wore it the first day. The producers were really mad at me. And the first thing I said to Mr. Connery when he arrived, and you can imagine there was silence 15 minutes before he arrived. People just standing like this. And he walked on the set, and there was a line of seamstresses because there were so many things, costumes to be made. And he walked right over to this one, and he said, "You fix this vest for me." And he goes, "How beautiful you are." And he took her hand and kissed her hand. And so I knew it would be fine to say, "Oh my God, you're James Bond," which I did. And he laughed, and he gave me a big hug, and that's why we became friends. He was totally cool, totally cool.
That movie's known for having a trouble mixed up post-production. Like 2 or 3 versions of that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, you know that. Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah, don't worry about that. But no, it did. Apparently, like, there's the final version before it went to distribution, they decided it makes sense.
Imagine that.
Well, anybody know about that, right? Highlander 2, there's like several versions of that. Apparently none of them are.
There really needs to be only one.
I walked into that one. I'm going to jump further. Number 23, Jim Carrey. Yeah. What was that like? Because that's a really intense movie.
Well, that was directed by Joel Schumacher, who's a good friend of mine, and I've known him since the 80s, and he never cast me in his movies. There was never anything really right for me, but we were always friendly, and this is another movie I wasn't originally to star in. This was going to be Nicole Kidman, and Nicole was pregnant, and so I was, you know, asked to. I met with Joel, and I didn't know that everyone was going to play 2 parts. I don't know. I read it the night before. I didn't get it that I was supposed to also be Fabrizia, and so I said, "Well, who are you going to get as her?" And he said, "Well, you're going to do that." I didn't really know they were going to cast my ex-husband in this other role. So I was very, I was glad I wanted to do the movie very much. I'd been wanting to work with Jim. And I knew that Jim was an actor first and a comedian second. That's how he first started. And I had always wanted to do a drama, especially after The Spotless Mind. His work was so good in that. And a lot of comedians are not funny when you meet them in real life. And Jim is an actor, so he's funny in real life, and he totally did Fire Marshal Bill. That was another thing everyone thought we weren't supposed to talk about Fire Marshal Bill. And my son came on the set and started building Legos with Jim, and my son had been watching In Living Color, and so that's how he did it for my son, and he was always funny. And there was a scene when I had to lay on the bed in a couple times I'd lay in bed with a lot of blood, and Jim would just like, sit there next to me, because you can't move for continuity reasons, and it's very uncomfortable, and it smells bad because it sort of smells like chocolate syrup. And he just would sit there and tell me stories and make me laugh and allow me to quite literally sit through it. And so I really liked working with him. I thought he was a very inventive actor and very spiritual guy. And I didn't know anybody who knew Jim, so I didn't know anything about him before I got there. But I sure would like to work with him again.
Okay, I want to ask you about something that's not genre related. You're nominated for Best Supporting Actress for Sideways, and won a lot of other awards. Best Award. What's it like going to the Academy Awards? Did you go that night?
Yes, I was a member for a while, and I never went because I wanted to have a real reason to be there.
Nominated is a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one. And it was perfect. I mean, it was like being Cinderella, but I didn't have to go home at midnight and I got to keep the shoes. It was just extraordinary. I mean, it takes a really long time to get to the front in your limo because there's so many cement barriers that you snake around for about a mile, and there's a lot of people, and so once you finally get up there, your heart is beating so fast because of the long buildup as you see the Kodak coming closer and closer and closer. And when I got out, I just took a moment and I closed my eyes and I took a deep breath, and then I stepped into my dream. It was absolutely it still always makes me want to cry because it was the most perfect night from beginning to end, and I really felt like I won because the chances of me getting there were slim, and so it was quite an extraordinary experience.
Now, we have time for a few brief questions. If anybody has any, now's the time. Yes?
Oh, well, he was dreamy. Paul is just we had such incredible chemistry, and they didn't, think that we would go together. And at least the initial studio that had the film before, Fox Searchlight, and Alexander knew, and I knew. I said, just put us in a room together. I know I'm going to have chemistry with that man. I know it. And Paul is, when I said he's dreamy, he'd be so embarrassed because he's such a humble, grounded person. He's nothing like Miles. And so, the first week, Paul comes on the set, and, the women are kind of like, hey, Paul, and then, a couple weeks in, they're like, hey, Paul, because he's got very beautiful eyes, and he's so nice and yes, some of us like nice guys. So it was a good experience.
Somebody in the back.
Yes, I have a question to ask her, even though I saw her doing my autograph. I'd like to ask her this. Did you enjoy doing the movie that I've seen, the movie for TV, in the early 2000s, Just Ask the Children?
Oh yes, that was a story. It was a Lifetime movie, and it was a devastating story with a lot of grief.
You and your TV husband were blamed for a certain crime, and you had to say to the lawyer.
It's a true story of being falsely convicted and going to jail and losing your children and being convicted for molesting them, and it was so devastatingly hard to watch. This movie was so sad that they only reran it, I think, one time. But it's a good one, and it's a true story if you ever get a chance. Yes, I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Working in Connecticut, was that actually filmed in Connecticut? Did you actually kind of believe the story after doing it? I mean,
well, I already knew about the story because I watch all those programs of ghost hunters and everything. I mean, I really watched them all, and so I knew about her story. And but no, we filmed it in Winnipeg, and which was a great place to shoot. And yes, I did believe their story. I did believe. I'm not sure I believed that it kept following them. You know, that was a little hard to swallow. But I do think that something really kind of miraculous happened in that house with that young man, and that he survived for so many years. Sad to say, he finally did pass away last year. He still is in medical journals for being one of the only people to ever survive that form of cancer, as long as he did. So something unique happened, and something that there was a lot of witness to. So
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming.